Our first speaker grew up on a corn and soybean farm in the southwest Iowa town of Shenandoah. He has spent over 2 decades promoting renewable fuels, the last 15 years as executive director of the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association. I have to interject here that I was one of the individuals that interviewed Monte those 15 years ago. He noted and allowed me to include the fact that his 15 years could be evidenced by his hairline. And I must say, there's a lot of us in that position. Please join me in welcoming Monte Shaw.
Well, thank you, Mike, for that introduction. As my kids would say, maybe a little TMI. But you are right. 2020 marked the beginning of my 3rd decade promoting biofuels. It certainly didn't go as expected. If 2020 taught us anything, well, anything other than how to get used to these things, it was to value our friends, our family, appreciate what's really important in life, and to cherish the accomplishments and memories. If we look back over the last 20 years, the accomplishments are significant, the memories are mostly sweet, and that's not to say we haven't had our challenges and tough times. Certainly last year was no picnic, but the years, especially the last 4, have taken a toll. Now here's a picture of me and my lovely fiancée, now wife, Tina, back when I started working for biofuels 20 plus years ago. And here's one of me at the height of my COVID protest beard a few months ago. Now I should note, my wife looks just as lovely today as she did back then, and well, I'm a little rougher around the edges. But the friendships forged over the past 2 decades more than offset for the retreat of my hairline. Mike was kind enough to highlight the hard work of the IRFA staff. I work with some great folks who are passionate about biofuels. Our newest team member is Lisa Kaufelt, our marketing director. Now this is her first year coordinating the summit, so while we can question her timing, we can't question the job she's done putting together a great event, even with the challenges of pulling off our first, and hopefully last, major virtual event. Cassidy Walter is our communications director and helps us get the word out about biofuels around Iowa and around the world. Nathan Hohenstein is our policy director. This time of year, he's down at the Iowa Capitol quite a bit, working to keep Iowa not just #1 in biofuels production, but on the cutting edge of biofuels policy as well. After 20 years, I have a pretty good handle on what the IRFA board will want done when a situation arises. But I'll also be the first to admit that that's not always the case. Confronting the challenges to the industry and even to operating a trade association in 2020 certainly highlighted that fact. More than ever, the IRFA board, especially the executive committee, gave their time to help lead and encourage the IRFA staff. I'm biased enough to think IRFA is a pretty darn good state trade association. Ultimately, that's a reflection of our board and their willingness, while competing in the marketplace, to come together for the common industry good in our boardroom, or I guess on this year at least on our Zoom calls. Now I'm an optimist, and I think by the end of 2021, we'll all feel better about the future, the health of our industry, and we'll be able to commiserate about what we've just come through once again face to face, maybe even with an ethanol-powered beverage in our hand. I certainly would look forward to that. Now normally I spend a little time right now reviewing the previous year, but who the heck wants to relive 2020? But before I go on, I would be remiss if I did not give out a shout out to a few folks for how they confronted COVID. It was clear early on that the demand for sanitizing products was overwhelming the commercial system. I reached out to Governor Kim Reynolds' office and offered our assistance. After all, hand sanitizer is mostly ethanol, and the other key ingredient is glycerin, a byproduct of biodiesel production. Governor Reynolds directed Iowa Prison Industries to undertake hand sanitizer production. While this was completely new to them, their leader, Dan Clark, has what I think of as a typical Iowa mentality: get it done. And he did. IRFA members Absolute Energy, Green Plains, and Southwest Iowa Renewable Energy donated shipments of ethanol. Western Iowa Energy donated glycerin. In the end, thousands of gallons, which equates to tens of millions of doses of hand sanitizer from this project, were distributed to the Iowa Veterans Home, Iowa prisons, housing facilities run by the Iowa Department of Human Services, child care facilities, hospitals, nonprofits, and many other groups and locations. I have no doubt that this project literally saved lives. On behalf of all Iowans, let me say a heartfelt thank you and a job well done. I will also never forget the generosity of Lincoln Way Energy. In the depths of the COVID lockdowns with fuel cells plummeting, you might remember that roughly half of the ethanol industry was shut down. Many folks in America didn't realize that much of our industrial CO2 is captured at ethanol plants. And they didn't realize that the uses of CO2 range from putting the bubbles in your beer and pop, to the dry ice needed for vaccine distribution, to even playing an integral role in many municipal water treatment facilities. Now, as I understand it, the word went out that the Des Moines Water Works was facing a critical shortage of CO2, and it could impact the city's water supply. Well, like a good neighbor, Lincoln Way Energy was there. The board of Lincoln Way voted to ramp up the plant even though it would be operating at a loss so they could supply CO2 to the city of Des Moines. Simply amazing, and yet so typically Iowan. There are too many other examples of plants making batches of hand sanitizer for local needs or donating N95 masks and PPE for me to recount here. But as IRFA staff, knowing that we're just a small part of an industry that is truly making a difference makes all the hard work, the frustrations, and even the setbacks worth going through. We may not win every battle, but we're on the right side of the war. Now, speaking of those battles, 2020 was it was like something out of a zombie apocalypse movie. Our industry just suffered through the triple whammy of RFS exemptions, lost export markets, and COVID demand destruction all piled on top of each other at the same time. You know it's a tough year when the historic derecho windstorm didn't even make the top 3 on your list of challenges. Yet here we are. The power of biofuels to propel the rural economy is so great that the people in this industry will simply never give up. And that, my friends, is the state of the Iowa biofuels industry in 2021. Battered, but battling for a better future. As Mike noted, this is a new time for the industry. With vaccines rolling out, we can hope that the worst of COVID is behind us, yet policy uncertainty and opportunity remains. And while some are tempted to think that with the Trump EPA in the rearview mirror, everything's just going to be easy going forward, I do not share that view. Now, certainly things should get better. The lack of transparency, consistency, candor, and even respect for the law exhibited at the EPA during the Trump administration was like nothing I've ever experienced before. But I've also been around long enough to know that biofuels will face battles regardless of who or what party controls the White House and Congress. No matter which way the political winds are blowing, we can be assured that pressure will be coming from either the petroleum interests on one side or the extreme wing of the environmental movement on the other, and usually both at the same time. Remember, the Obama EPA approved E15 for 2001 and newer vehicles, but not the summer volatility allowance. They denied the state oil governor's request for RFS waivers, but then turned around and illegally exercised the general RFS waiver authority to destroy 1 billion gallons of biofuel demand. They approved cellulosic corn kernel fiber RFS pathways, but ended the incentive for flex fuel vehicle production. Then the Trump EPA destroyed over 4 billion gallons of biofuel demand through their illegal use of RFS refinery exemptions. But they approved summertime E15 sales. They shut down the new cellulosic RFS pathways, but they signed into law a multi-year extension of the biodiesel blenders tax credit. Now let me be clear. I am not trying to argue one side is better than the other. I'm simply making the point that biofuels have always and will always face challenges. Our optimism for the future shouldn't be blind. At the same time, I do look forward to embracing the new opportunity today to build a better, more trusting and productive relationship with the Biden EPA. And there are reasons to be optimistic. On the campaign trail, President Biden criticized the rampant use of refinery exemptions by the Trump EPA, stating, "We have a president who has sold out our farmers by undercutting the renewable fuel standard with the granting of waivers to big oil. The renewable fuel standard marks our bond with our farmers. A Biden-Harris administration will promote and advance renewable energy, ethanol, and other biofuels to help rural America and our farmers," end quote. President Biden should follow through by quickly restoring the proper legal thresholds for RFS exemption requests. But IRFA will also be urging President Biden to repair the damage. One early way to restore trust and institute respect for the law would be for the Biden EPA to put back the 500 million reman gallons that you've heard me talk about for probably the last 4 summits. But think about it. The Obama EPA illegally waived these gallons in 2016. Our industry sued. The DC Circuit Court sided with us in 2017 and remanded the case back to the EPA to restore those lost gallons. Of course, by this time, Trump's folks were in charge at EPA. And despite 4 years of opportunity and, believe me, urging, Mr. Pruitt and Mr. Wheeler just blatantly ignored the court order. Think of the message it would send if Biden's EPA acted quickly to follow the court's directives, thereby providing the ointment the Trump EPA withheld to heal the wound the Obama EPA created. Now, certainly there are more far-reaching issues facing our industry, but the message from this one action, which could be taken immediately, would signify that we are truly entering a new, more hopeful phase for biofuels. And there's no shortage of things to be done. At last year's summit, I put up on the screen a to-do list for 2020. Between the COVID pandemic and a presidential election that tied many policy debates into knots, a little, but really not much, progress occurred. As I scanned that list, we could check off one, maybe two of these priorities, but then again, we'd need to add Brazil trade issues and a low carbon octane standard, among other new challenges to the list. In short, we must be ready to do battle in 2021. I believe one of those battles will be getting some folks in the Biden administration to stand behind sound science instead of just adopting the bumper sticker policy fads of the day. Never in my lifetime has DC descended into the tribalism and lack of serious thought we are seeing today. And let's face it, that's saying something. We are seeing facts, logic, deliberation shunned in favor of pronouncements from a pantheon of political deities from across the partisan spectrum. We are seeing elected officials hit the policy easy button of an unworkable slogan that will fit on a bumper sticker instead of bringing people together to work on real solutions that require time, earnest effort, and heaven forbid, a bit of compromise. Self-appointed leaders are more concerned about outdoing their rivals for interviews on cable news shows than about the practicality of what they're espousing. One example of this is the headlong rush to enact an electric vehicle mandate. Now, I think EV sales are going to continue to grow and that they will play an important role in our transportation future. But just look how the debate has changed over the last year or so. We started with some calling to expand the cap on the current EV tax credit so more rich people can get $10,000 of your tax dollars for buying a Tesla. Others wanted to spend billions and billions to build charging stations. Then people said, wait a minute, that's not aggressive enough. We will mandate all cars be EVs by 2050. And then, that's too late to help, said others. We should mandate EVs by 2045. No, 2040. No, 2035. Then it came down to 2035, but the phase-in had to start at 2025. Today, this is in an executive order in California and is legislation sponsored by several leading senators and House members in D.C. No thought if automakers could actually produce that many EVs by 2025. No thought as to what a normal working person might be able to actually afford. And most importantly, no thought as to whether EVs are even the best option available today to reduce carbon. And that's the part that bothers me the most. If you truly care about climate change, shouldn't that be your first question? Or do you just care about sounding like you're a leader in the fight against climate change? Now, here's the dirty little secret. An EV today, charged in a state like Missouri or Minnesota or many others that rely on coal for electricity, actually has a higher carbon footprint per mile than my flex fuel Tahoe motoring down the road powered by E85. Biofuel supporters must be ready to fight EV mandates in 2021. In Iowa here, we're off to a good start. When this legislation popped up in D.C., we reached out to all of the candidates running for federal office. Now, half these candidates had an R behind their name and half a D. Some listed climate change as a priority issue, some did not. But they were united in saying that an EV mandate was a mistake for Iowa and a mistake for reducing carbon as well. If there is to be a new carbon policy, then set the goals and let the various technologies compete, because biofuels are the best option to reduce carbon over the next decade. And with advances in production technology at the plants, coupled with advances in farming practices, there's no reason that traditional biofuels like corn ethanol and soy biodiesel can't be darn close to net carbon neutrality by the end of this decade, if farmers are given credit for their carbon sequestration. So biofuel supporters also better be ready to battle for sound science in accounting for farming improvements. There are groups out in DC right now trying to convince the Biden team that farmers are bad, growing corn is horrible for the environment, and biofuels like ethanol are nothing short of evil. Luckily, we will have a strong and knowledgeable voice inside the Biden administration. And that's because there is no doubt that USDA Secretary-designee Tom Vilsack will stand up for sound science for both farming and biofuels. But he cannot stand alone. We need Iowa united. We need the Midwest united. Over the past 4 years, our Iowa champions have battled relentlessly on our behalf. We owe a huge debt of gratitude to Governor Reynolds and Senators Grassley and Ernst. It is frightening to think of how much more difficult our position would be today if they had taken even one day off from the fight. But with the new administration, biofuel supporters will also need new champions to step up and lead some fights. And as some of the new faces that step to the forefront, they may not always be from Iowa, but Iowa will always stand beside them. There may be a long to-do list, but I believe the biofuels community and our elected champions are ready to battle for a better future. Panelists later today will dig into some of the policy and trade battles on the horizon, but I wanted to highlight one opportunity right now. I have not yet spoken with or met the new designee to head the Biden EPA. Michael Regan is a veteran of the EPA, the Environmental Defense Fund, and state environmental enforcement. But what caught my eye was this passage in Nature magazine, quote, Regan is expected to put new emphasis on environmental justice to protect poor and underrepresented communities that are disproportionately impacted by pollution and climate change, end quote. Now, the term environmental justice may be new to some of you, but the concept has been gaining steam for over the last decade. In short, its adherents believe we don't just need to protect the environment, we also need to ensure that we do so in a way that protects poor and minority communities. If you're a Summit veteran, you may remember we've had a panel in the past few years on tailpipe benefits of ethanol compared to petroleum-based octane alternatives. It is an IRFA priority to promote this beneficial aspect of ethanol. Ethanol doesn't just reduce carbon emissions, it also reduces cancer-causing tailpipe emissions. We will be seeking to share with Mr. Regan the findings Dr. Stephen Mueller presented at last year's summit on how switching from aromatics like benzene to higher blends of ethanol will not just clean the air we breathe, but it will disproportionately benefit those communities who live closest to major roadways. And those communities are disproportionately poor and/or minorities. We hope the new ears at EPA will be more willing to listen to this topic than the previous appointees. And while we always keep one eye on DC, it would be a mistake to put all our policy hopes and dreams in the DC basket. Coastal elites are trying to dictate our energy future, and their vision usually doesn't take into consideration what the Midwest and agriculture have to offer. And too often, they even put their finger on the scales of sound science in an effort to promote their preferred bumper sticker solutions over biofuels. IRFA believes it would be a major mistake to sit back and let the coast drive the energy debate. Midwestern states like Iowa need to aggressively carve out a role for biofuels in this region before it's too late. Now, one note of caution. As Midwestern states seek to become more active in biofuels policy debate, we need to ensure we don't succumb to the mirage of bumper sticker solutions either. I firmly believe that over the next several years, unleaded 88 will become the new normal. It's cheaper, cleaner, better for your engine. It's selling itself. Certainly there will be state and federal policies that will allow that transition to happen sooner, and we should support those. But my caution is this. Biofuel supporters must consider not just the fuel, we must keep access to the fuel tank as a top priority as well. Now let me explain. Let's say someone proposes a low carbon fuel standard, and let's say that LCFS is based on sound science and it's not biased against biofuels like some of the current coastal models are. Sounds good, right? Well, yes. Well, and no. A little over a year ago, I sat in a meeting with automakers where they were crystal clear that every new LCFS policy enacted was a signal to them to increase investments to bring more electric vehicles to the market sooner. More EVs equals fewer fuel tanks. So under this biofuels-friendly low-carbon fuel standard, ethanol blends might be the most attractive carbon option, but they would be capped at 15% of the fuel tank, and there would be fewer fuel tanks in the vehicles, fewer vehicles with fuel tanks. Therefore, the question becomes, does an LCFS that speeds the move to unleaded 88 for liquid-fueled vehicles create more of a benefit than is offset by the corresponding reduction in the production of liquid-fueled vehicles. I urge biofuel supporters working on state and federal policy to keep in mind fuel tank access for higher blends and be wary of analyses that magically assume ethanol will gain more than a 15% share of the tank without specific policy provisions that will approve higher blends in new vehicles. Now let me be clear, IRFA is not opposed to LCFS proposals, but let's not just make unleaded 88 attractive. Biofuel supporters must battle to open up the tank for even higher blends. The former without the latter may actually move us backwards. To this end, I should note there's legislation pushed by the national corn growers and many biofuels groups that does both. It's known as a low carbon octane standard. It would drive higher blends of ethanol use, but it also includes key provisions that would allow much higher ethanol blends in the future vehicles powered by liquid fuels. Now back here in Iowa, IRFA will work with ag and biofuels groups, with Governor Reynolds and with our legislature to pursue any opportunity to drive demand for biofuels. Federal policy is hugely important and export markets can be hugely beneficial, but we've seen over the last 4 years how fickle they can be as well. Now while biodiesel production hung tough last year, the recent challenges resulted in Iowa producing 500 million gallons less ethanol in 2020 than just the year before. Biofuels are still one of the most important drivers for the Iowa economy, but our positive impact was diminished. According to IRFA's annual economic impact study, the production of ethanol and biodiesel accounts for nearly $4 billion in state GDP, supports 37,000 direct and indirect jobs, and boosts Iowa household income by $1.8 billion. Hey, that is a significant impact, but all of those numbers are down 20 to 25% compared to the previous year. Quite frankly, this is a wake-up call to redouble our efforts at the state level. If Midwestern states can work together, we can drive local demand for biofuels in a meaningful way, thereby providing a sturdy market foundation, even as we supply the rest of the United States and markets around the world. Now, Iowa currently has a pretty successful suite of tax incentives and grants for retailers to offer biofuels, but we will need to examine every program and consider proposals that might drive demand further and faster. Many consider the most effective program for biofuels in Iowa to be our Renewable Fuels Infrastructure Program, or RFIP for short. Now, RFIP is a public-private partnership that gives retailers cost-share grants to help install equipment so they can offer biodiesel blends and E15. And we market that here in Iowa as unleaded 88, and they can offer those to consumers. Now, the popularity of unleaded 88 with more octane at a lower price than regular unleaded is attracting consumers and retailers alike. In fact, to date, roughly 900 projects funded by RFIP have leveraged almost $250 million in private investment. The demand is so great that the RFIP program ran out of funding at the very first of what should have been 4 quarterly board meetings. Today, there are so many pending grant requests, with 5 months still to go in the fiscal year, that if the legislature provided the historic funding level of $3 million, it wouldn't even cover the requests that are sitting there, let alone those that will come in over the next 5 years. And remember, that next round of funding is supposed to be for the next fiscal year, not to cover the shortfalls in this fiscal year. Iowa needs to dramatically increase RFIP funding if it wants to maximize the move to higher ethanol blend availability. IRFA today is calling on the legislature to provide $15 million a year for the next 5 years so that every retailer in Iowa will have an opportunity to move to unleaded 88. Is this aggressive? Yes. Can it be done? Absolutely. IRFA stands ready to work with the legislature to explore ways to secure this new funding without creating shortfalls in other areas. In order for Iowa to forge a better future, this is a battle worth fighting. And this is the type of workable but impactful policy we need to see more of around Iowa and the United States. Policymakers should put the bumper sticker solutions behind them and let technologies truly compete. In doing so, the future is bright for biofuels. As we turn to a new page in the biofuel story, let's work together to write that next chapter in a way that embraces these new opportunities while applying the lessons from the past. I'm an optimist, and I believe the new chapter for biofuels can be our best yet. Now, speaking of new, the unofficial theme for this year's summit, after a brief message from our sponsors, You can join me to explore the new direction for biofuels policy in 2021 and beyond with a panel of experts and insiders. Thanks for joining us today, and I'll see you again in a couple of minutes. Thank you.